Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE exam and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE exam. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner, and an essay grader, and of course, plenty of full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast gets you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, we've got Stacy Blackman Consulting on the line with us, and we have Chandler and Anthony. And Chandler, I'd love if you could just start us off by telling us a little bit about Stacy Blackman Consulting, and then we'd love to hear about each of your backgrounds.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much, Tyler, for having us today. Stacy Blackman Consulting is a leading MBA admissions advisory with a proven track record of acceptances to all the world's top MBA programs. I love it especially because we're the only admissions advisory firm with a complete panel of former U.S. and European MBA admissions officers, including Harvard and Stanford, ranked number one by Poets and Quants for our admissions experts. And, just as importantly to me, last round, we helped folks get about 4.8 million in scholarship awards to go to their dream MBA program. As I said, my name is Chandler. I went to Stanford Business School. And I do a lot of work with Stacy in different categories, including running our own podcast, along with my amazing colleague, Erica. And we're excited to replay this conversation there a few weeks after it airs. So thanks so much for having us. And I'm especially happy that Anthony is here with us today, who is our expert on all things GRE.
Hey guys, I'm Anthony. I am the Director of Test Prep at Stacy Blackman Consulting. And I've been tutoring for over 20 years now, including decades of GRE experience, and help students go to pretty much every top business school down the line. As for myself, I have multiple perfect GRE scores and average a 5-star rating, a couple different places online. So I've had a lot of experience with this, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share that with all the students out there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, great to meet you both, and excited to talk about some big changes that are going on in test prep land today, right? So first there was the GMAT Focus, and that kind of was a shortened GMAT that was announced, I feel like, was it end of last year, beginning of this year, but recently. And then the GRE kind of, whether it was in response to that or whether it was something else, has announced recently that they're going to launch the new, much shorter GRE in September of this year. The number of question, or the amount of time you have per question, is actually going to go down. So you have to answer more questions in a shorter period of time. This is a broader trend. My company, we also do ACT prep and, are familiar with the SAT, and the new SAT is also a good bit shorter. So it's interesting. I mean, I think first and foremost, kind of let's talk about what you think about the general trend of like doing shorter tests. Where does that come from? Why are we seeing it across both graduate and undergraduate admissions? And then maybe let's talk about the specifics, what is the new GMAT Focus and what is the new short GRE? Yeah, so I'm curious what you guys think about sort of this general move towards shorter tests, right? Like, where does it come from, and is it a good change or a bad change? Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's pretty clearly come from students, actually. Certainly, I was speaking with GMAC just recently. They held a bit of a summit, and a lot of the top test prep companies kind of came in and got a chance to talk to them and ask questions. And one thing they were very, very clear on is that they did a tremendous amount of speaking with students and schools, and kind of seeing what students really wanted and what was really important to them. And one of the very top things that students wanted was a shorter, more efficient, somewhat less painful test. And then schools also were very clear in saying they wanted it to be shorter, to be easier on the candidates. So I think that's really what has sparked this move. And then as far as whether that's, a good thing or a bad thing, I think there are always trade-offs in terms of a shorter test. Obviously, the fewer questions you have and the shorter the test is, the less data that's generating on students, and the less that the schools will have to go on, and those, potentially less reliable the tests are as metrics to determine who's likely to be successful in business school. Although one thing I can talk about a little later is that GMAC, on the GMAT side, has done a number of things to try to preserve reliability and make the test more effective with their changes. And of course, the big advantage is that it's a lot easier for the students just to have a shorter test, which after all is what's driving this whole thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm curious about that. You mentioned that sort of GMAC has put in place some, I don't know if safeguards is the right word, but basically just like some ways to protect the integrity of the test, even though it's shorter. And I'm curious, like, if you could outline those at a high level for us.
Yeah, give me 1 second here.
Sure. Because I know that this is not quite in the scope of what you're talking about, but like the digital SAT, had a similar sort of spiel about how the test is still going to be just as valid and et cetera. And I'm sure the GRE did as well, right? So part of it is like the adaptive thing, right? The ability to essentially, give more difficult questions when people are doing well and easier questions when people are doing poorly. That gives a broader range of material that people are going to interact with, and gives you the ability to kind of like tune the experience a little bit more. But is there anything else sort of that we should know about kind of how it works?
Yeah, there's actually several things that the GMAT people were talking about that they've done to try to maintain and even improve reliability. Some of which actually come down simply to the algorithm of the adaptive test that they're using. That's really cutting edge stuff, and the math of it is still developing, even in the last few years. And part of the place that they're getting to be able to do a shorter test and maintain accuracy is that they've simply improved the algorithm, the computer adaptive algorithm that they're using. Basically, it's a smarter algorithm now that is able to more quickly kind of figure out what level of questions to give people.
Mhm.
So they actually gave a bunch of correlation numbers, and they're really maintaining. Another big thing that they're doing is they're simply slightly shifting what the test is testing, and removing one of the main focuses, which then allows them to devote more questions to all the things they still are really interested in looking at. In particular, they're removing the sentence correction from the GMAT focus as well as the essay, and they're really removing emphasis then from some of these verbal skills. Um,
Mhm.
that what they've heard from schools is that they can kind of test these verbal skills in other ways, and schools don't need the GMAT to be a test of, you know, some of those verbal skills. And as
Hmm.
such, they are able to focus more fully on just testing quantitative reasoning and, you know, reasoning skills in the verbal section, and then data analysis skills. So their numbers internally say that the test should be just about the same reliability.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, I wonder how much of that is born out of the fact that the GMAT is, focused on MBA programs and generally, the quant section is more important, right? Do you feel like for the GRE that, like, when I looked at the GRE, it looks like they're keeping the content almost exactly the same. Do you agree with that? And is that maybe because GRE is a broader test?
Uh, right. My understanding, and even what GRE says on their own website, is that the content is not changing. On the shorter GRE, there would simply be less of it. I do think that the GRE obviously has a broader mission in terms of being a test for all different sorts of graduate programs. And so by its nature, they have to keep their content fairly generalized. But the GRE does have some data analysis sort of elements in its math section already, and that's just something that is now a really renewed emphasis on the GMAT, and maybe they're even going to go further in that direction than the GRE has been.
Yeah, so then I guess with these shorter tests, right? I mean, does it change at all which one you're recommending to students based on their goals, or or what they're good at, or is it still kind of feeling like you should be looking at them the same way?
Uh, so obviously the changes do affect things somewhat. The GMAT in particular is just going to have a different question mix than it did before, even if the GRE is remaining largely the same in that regard. Um, but it doesn't mean that I would say that students should now take one or the other in particular. I think that it really depends on the individual student and their strengths and weaknesses. It's just that now, if your weakness was grammar skills, on the old GMAT, that might have been a deterrent, but those sort of language skills are no longer something that's being tested there, whereas the GRE still has a very vocabulary based focus. And so maybe for people who are more concerned about their language skills, there's a bit of a shift towards the GMAT as a better option. But the GMAT is now much heavier on data analysis. It has a whole counting section now of data analysis that wasn't really there before. The integrated reasoning was always this sort of weird, only half counted thing. And so, for people who are more concerned about their data analytics skills and that sort of reasoning, maybe they lean a little harder towards the GRE than they otherwise would have.
Got it. Yeah, and then Chandler, I kind of have a question for you here. I mean, as like one of the things that stuck out to me in Anthony's sort of explanation of why are the tests getting shorter was that the students obviously want shorter tests, I think, just because they're less painful. Um, but the admissions officers also wanted shorter tests, which was a little surprising to me. So I'm just curious, sort of, why admissions officers would want shorter tests. Like, what is creating that desire for them?
I think it's a great question, and I would love to say that it's because admissions officers want what's best for students. That is my temptation. The truth is, I don't know that I could really speak to that. I think what we are hearing from admissions officers is more to the question of, should I take the GMAT or the GRE as an applicant? Do you or does your institution have a preference for one test over the other? And what I'm definitely hearing in that regard is that if a school accepts both tests, then the school accepts both tests, and I think in the early days of the GRE being accepted, I think that there was sort of a little bit of a hangover in people's minds, thinking that the GRE was somehow less valid or that they would be dinged for taking the GRE as opposed to the GMAT. And I definitely hear admissions officers saying that if they accept both tests, they accept both tests, and they want the student to take the test that they feel that they would do the best at relative to their peers. I mean, I don't know, Anthony, have you heard anything else about an admissions officer view or other views on the shortened test?
No, I mean, I think the main reason that they wanted the shortened test was for students. And of course, admissions officers are not entirely altruistic in this. They want students to apply to their schools. And, if the tests are longer and that's dissuading students from taking them and applying to their schools, that is bad for everyone. So, the admissions officers want to make sure that students have tests that are approachable enough that, if they're well suited to go to law school, or to business school, pardon me.
Oh, it doesn't matter. Or business school, right?
Business
I
school, yeah.
mean, GRE is also used for a lot of different schools, so it's all good.
Right. Sure. But if they have students who are well suited to go to business school, then, they want those students to be in the pipeline and applying.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing also is just that if truly these companies can get the same results with a 2 hour test versus a 4 hour test, then I mean, why not? Right? I think that that's the whole thing. I mean, I also wanted to chat about sort of, again, this might be something that, the answer is it depends, right? But whether you feel like this changes sort of the makeup of the test, like the test body for a particular school, I feel like there's so many schools that have had a really big shift from GMAT to more GRE applicants in the last few years. And part of me was wondering if the GMAT focus would, help swing that the other way, but now the GRE is also going to be shorter, so clearly they were worried about the same thing. And then on the other side of it, you've got, the GRE releases their statistics every year, and they have seen like a big influx of test takers in India in particular. So I'm just wondering if you feel like that these two changes are going to kind of cancel each other out, or if it's going to change the makeup of sort of who takes what test and how often schools see them.
I definitely think that the changes in the GMAT were prompted by concerns about the GRE eating into their market share, at least in some part. I think they also legitimately felt that they could write a better test and make some improvements, but it's something that they're aware of, and they've been working on this for years to try to reestablish their position in the market. And then I think it's pretty clear that the GRE's new shortened test is a response to what the GMAT did. I think they came out very, very quickly after the GMAT came out saying, hey, we've got a new shorter test. We're not really changing anything. We're just cutting off a bunch of questions and one of the essays. And it's still very prominently, they're like, it's still going to be shorter than the new GMAT. And they've scheduled it to actually start testing before the new the new GMAT does. So I think it's very clear that they were concerned enough to have a response. As far as how that might change, what happens with students, I think you mentioned whether the numbers are the same. I think that's a really big question that we have to wait and see. I know that, GMAT has done a bunch of internal study to make sure that they were maintaining reliability. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to get in front of ETS and ask about the GRE first person. I don't know what's going to happen to their numbers. I do know that the feeling over at GMAC is that they don't expect the new GRE to maintain the same level of reliability. And then what will schools do with that? We're all really waiting to find out. We don't know yet.
So then the last thing I want to talk to you guys about was how does this do the shorter tests change either how you prepare for the test and then also how you should approach the test itself, right? There's so many tips and tricks even that I've heard on this podcast, and I'm kind of wondering like which ones are still going to be valid, etc. But for the preparation step, let's go over that first. Do you feel like the shorter test will require less preparation, the same amount of preparation? Do you think that you've prepared for different things? I know that you said, Anthony, that the GMAC has changed some of the content on the GMAT focus. So curious sort of what you would recommend to people that are starting to study for these tests right now.
Sure. So again, I think the answer for the GRE is pretty easy. I don't think there's any real change to how you prepare for that test.
Mhm.
GRE people have been very clear about that. It's on their website. You can still prepare the same way. All your preparation's still good. Same questions. The GMAT answer, I think, is more interesting. They definitely had the goal of reducing prep time, and I think that most tutors agree that among all the verbal sections, the most preparation heavy section was the sentence correction. So moving that from the test, I think will potentially reduce student study time for the verbal side of it pretty significantly. Um, the trade-off is that may be slightly counterbalanced, although I don't think it'll be totally counterbalanced, but slightly by the fact that the data analysis actually sort of counts now. You had
Right.
integrated reasoning before, and schools didn't really know what to do with it, and students didn't really know how much it mattered, and it didn't factor into the primary score, and now it does. So, everyone's going to have to adjust and start working on that and working to improve on that. But I think the hope is that that is a skill set that can be prepared for a little more quickly, and a skill set that is a little more familiar to a lot of students who are going to business school. It's reading charts and graphs and tables and looking at multiple short sources and reasoning about them. And it's the sort of thing that a lot of us do on a day-to-day basis in our jobs. So the hope is that, that doesn't necessarily require as much prep, and the net time still presumably goes down.
Mhm. Great. Yeah, and then any thoughts about any tips or tricks for taking the test itself, right? Like something that um, it's basically it's shorter in both the number of questions and in the amount of time, such that there's not a dramatic difference in how much time you get per question or anything like that. So do you feel like taking the test, the sort of same tactics apply? Is it maybe you're a little more careful and a little more conscientious of errors because there's fewer questions? Or are there any other things that you'd recommend?
Actually, it might almost be the opposite, interestingly enough, because one other
Hmm.
feature that the GMAT has added is the ability to go back and change questions. You can't do it
Oh,
until you.
wow.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. They're very excited about it. It's something that students have apparently had really, really high on their list. I mean, I say apparently in their data, but also I've certainly heard it from my students for a very long time. Um, and they finally got that feature now. It's a new thing because the adaptive, scores each question to decide the next one. So it was always thought there's no way to let you change an answer. But they've tested it out and they found a way to let students at the end of the section, once you've answered every question, go back and review as many questions as you want and then change the answers to up to three of them. Now that's limited at three because they don't want people gaming the system, and they've tested it out and they're making sure like no one can game this. So there's no point to saying, "Oh, I'm going to on purpose miss the first three and get easy questions and then just go back and fix them later." Like that won't work out for you. They've tested it out. They made sure. But what it does do and what it's meant to do is help the students who get really stuck, who get, into a question and just sort of frozen because they feel like they should be able to do it and they should be able to do it and they spend longer and longer and longer and they spend, you know, not just 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes on a question they just can't let go and they just completely torpedo their time management. And the hope is that by giving these students the ability to go back and change answers, it makes it easier for them to just let go. Because when students
Mhm.
have pacing problems on at least the GMAT, and to a certain extent the GRE as well, it's not usually that they're just a little slow on every question. It really is that 5 minute, 6 minute question here and there. It's the couple questions going way too long. That's what really kills you. And so,
Mhm.
um, I think that the way this does change is that now you should be a little bit quicker. I mean, we always told students, hey, you should let these questions go. You should just let them go and move on. And if you miss them,
Right.
so be it. You'll get it back later in the test. But now I think it's even an easier sell to just say, look, if you're really struggling with a question here and there, you can't do it with every question, but you can't let it go 5 minutes. And if you're starting to get too long, just let it go, move on, pick an answer, whatever answer, and at the end of the section, just go back and if time permits, get an answer at that point.
Great.
You know, Anthony, I love that comment. And I might just add one piece. And again, I'm not a text prep expert, but one thing that I would remind our listeners is that admissions officers look at your test score for whichever test you take in the context of your larger application whole. So it's your test score, your undergraduate grades, your essays, your recommendations. All of these things come together. So, yes, you absolutely want to get the best test score that you can. And I think it makes a lot of sense to try both tests to see which one is the best for you. But I've spoken to so many applicants over the years who um, there's something about this test or these tests that makes folks particularly nervous or scared. And I think that if you can sort of turn that around and find a way to feel empowered, some people kind of gamify it in their heads. I just want our listeners to feel empowered and to feel that this is one opportunity to do their very best, but that there are also these other application elements. Um, I think I want to disabuse people of thinking that this is the only critical part of their application because there are several different critical parts.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Not even as the director of test prep, I'm not out there telling anyone the tests are, the only thing that matters. I think that it's a piece, but there are a lot of important pieces that go into this, and a strong test score can help you pick up a little bit for where other things on your application may be a little weaker, but in the same way, if the test score isn't quite as strong, maybe there's some other things about your profile that can really carry you where you want to go.
Totally. And Anthony, I know that you do such a great job with folks helping them find a way to sort of feel as comfortable as they can going into the test. And I feel like that's another thing that I want our listeners to feel, hopefully these great podcasts that Tyler puts together help you feel excited as opposed to terrified, and ready to do your very
Hopefully.
best.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly the point is, the test is a performance and you should do the best that you can, right? And that's kind of, I don't know, as we're kind of wrapping up this conversation, I think something that I will just, I think I've shared before, but I'll share again, is that whether you take the GRE or the GMAT, you should really just be taking the one that you're going to be happiest with. And whether that's related to the content of the test or the format of the test or, you know, which one you think is more important is kind of up to you. But it's definitely important to get yourself into a mindset that like, I've got to do this thing. It's kind of like when I had to, do a play in eighth grade or when I had to prepare for the playoffs in whatever sport I played, like whatever it is, I've got to perform. So you got to be happy with what you're going to do.
Absolutely. I think mental state is so important and so underappreciated by students. Going into a test and feeling comfortable can make 100 points worth of difference on the GMAT or a similar dramatic difference on the GRE. So if you feel more comfortable taking one test over the other, that is far more important than almost any other consideration here and almost any perception that you may have about, which sections or schools or tests you're supposed to, prefer. So I think that that's a great comment.
Yeah. Do you two have any sort of parting thoughts as we wrap up this episode on this topic or feeling good?
I whenever I talk to applicants, I've used this advice previously about essays. I tell people to be authentic and to be vulnerable and to be bold. And as you all were talking, I was just trying to think about to what extent, if any, that translates into taking the GRE, the GMAT. And I do think, especially that boldness comes into play. I love the analogy. I was a competitive swimmer growing up, and I would definitely psych myself up before I got up on the block to dive in. And those times when I was excited and fired up and looking forward to the race, I competed better than when I was afraid or scared. That those negative feelings tend to diminish my belief in myself. And so I love the idea of finding a place in your own head where you're excited and confident about performing and to enjoy the show.
Wonderful.
Exactly. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable, with Chandler, Arnold, and Anthony Ritz from Stacy Blackman Consulting. And Achievable has a great online GRE course that you can try for free by visiting achievable.me. And be sure to use the code podcast to get 10% off.